States. Prime Minister of Canada, John MacDonald, said of our Constitution, "I think and believe it is one of the most perfect organizations ever governed of free people." I've often stated a conclusion about the Constitution that no liberal or neoconservative likes to hear. And it is simply that if the Constitution were fully and honestly obeyed as it exists today, the federal government would be 20% its size and 20% its cost. I've even been chided by a few friends here and there who say my figure is wrong and should be 10%. Just imagine. No Department of Education, no foreign aid, no housing, no health, no agriculture, no homeland security, no commissions, bureaucratic monstrosities, and other meddlesome agencies. King George was indicted by the Declaration of Independence. If you've ever read it, you know that one of the indictments of King George was, "He hath erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance." That was what our founders said in 1776. Does that sound familiar? Is that applicable today? If the Constitution were fully enforced, there would be no undeclared wars, no policing the planet, no Federal Reserve, no federal income tax, no Big Brother edicts, no Department of Homeland Security. Let me make a point about that. Isn't that why we have a military, Homeland Security? We don't need this thing they got down there in Washington. We have our troops now stationed all across the world, in more than 100 countries. They're providing security for the homelands of other people when we need it here at home. I revere the Constitution, but I don't think it's perfect, because mere mortals can't come up with anything perfect. Still, like many, I have my favorite passage. And mine is Article 1, Section 1, Sentence 1 of the Constitution. It says, "All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in Congress." That's the legislative branch. Now, if there are any algebra students here amongst us, I need help. Okay? If you know any algebra, maybe you can help me out. If all lawmaking power belongs in Congress, how much belongs in the Supreme Court?
None.
I got some algebra students. Thank you. None. The word "all" still has meaning for some Americans. A Supreme Court decision can't be the law of the land, as we're told so frequently. It's the law of the case. It binds the plaintiff and the defendant, period. And most of the decisions of the Supreme Court should be, it's not a federal matter, it's none of our business, and send it back down to the states and to the people. Instead, layer upon layer of government has been sanctioned and even initiated by the black-robed justices who regularly ignore the very first sentence in the Constitution that they've sworn an oath to obey. Okay, you algebra students, help me out again. If all lawmaking power is in Congress, how much is in the executive branch? Again, none. Not if the first sentence means anything, yet we get executive orders, presidential decision directives, signing statements from the White House that become law. This is another serious violation of the Constitution's first sentence. An executive order from the White House addressed to federal employees is proper, but if it binds the whole nation, it's not. An executive order could come from the White House saying simply all federal employees shall have a paid holiday on the 25th of December to celebrate the birth of the Lord. That's proper. But an executive order that binds every one of us is not proper, it's wrong, it's not the president's prerogative, and Congress should not allow it. But go back to that sentence again. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in Congress. Herein granted where? Herein granted in this. In the Constitution of the United States. Very simply, any power possessed by the federal government not granted in those pages is simply illicit. And I defy anybody to find foreign aid, education, housing, transportation, medicine, or policing the world. There's a great lesson in the first sentence. I commend it to your attention. Now let me go back and say that the goal of some people is to force us into a new world order. It wasn't accomplished with the threat of communism, nor have several other routes to achieve world government paved the way for the globalists. But right now our country faces an economic threat, one that is both very real and very dangerous. Could our nation be destroyed through debt and inflation? The answer, sad to relate, is absolutely yes. America could be brought to its knees economically, and the New World Order advocates running our government would be happy to rescue us by introducing a new money system and international control. World currency and world government would be the answer. That would be the end of hard-won independence. Excuse me a second here. I am Irish, but it is water. So, we hear the word bankruptcy a lot, even that our nation is bankrupt. But bankruptcy has never been defined, or at least I haven't seen it defined. I'll define it for you. Bankruptcy is the condition of not being able to borrow. That's pretty simple. Yes, the U.S. is borrowing. We're borrowing from China, from Japan, from Singapore, and from elsewhere. These lenders know that there's a great wealth still held by the American people. And this is the wealth that is targeted by the foreign lenders and by our own government leaders. Wealth is confiscated through inflation. Independence is squandered through borrowing from foreign governments. This is what is happening. America is being brought down, and the path to world government is being built through debt. You hear the term inflation a lot, but you don't hear it defined very well. Inflation is simply an increase in the quantity of currency. It is not rising prices, it causes rising prices. I like to say, if you believe that inflation is rising prices, you'll also believe wet streets cause rain. No. No, wet streets don't cause rain. Wet streets are the result of rain. Rising prices are the result of inflation that lowers the value of the dollars and invites people to charge more for their goods and services. Now I'm going to hold up something, and I know you can't see it, but I'm going to hold it up and at least tell you what it says. Thanks. It's November 26th of 2008. And the headline says, U.S. plans $800 billion in lending to ease the crisis. In the very first sentence of the article, front page, New York Times, it said they would print as much money as needed. Now, I didn't make it up. There's the New York Times telling us. I thought the man who wrote that article would be fired. He wasn't fired. He came back a few months later, and he did it again. March 9th. 2009, again, New York Times. Fed will inject $1 trillion more to aid the economy. And the article says, right in the second paragraph, that it's going to do so as a way of getting more dollars into the economy, a tactic that amounts to creating vast new sums of money out of thin air. Out of thin air. They're giving thin air a bad name. You sometimes hear the phrase that they're spending money like a drunken sailor. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I got news for you. Drunken sailors spend their own money. And I bet there's some sailors out there that can confirm that. So we have an economic downturn. And we see that government is doing all kinds of things. When government shouldn't be doing things, it should be undoing things. It should be undoing all kinds of things. Now, the people who are running the economic part of our country, Secretary of Treasury Geithner and head of the Economic Council, a man named Summers. And then you've got Paul Volcker back in the White House, God help us.